Pizza, please eat pizza.
You want us to bring the pizza in and eat now? While they're talking?
That's what I want you to do. I want you to do it on camera.
You got a chance to meet Connor, right?
I did.
Yes.
Apparently my wife is his wife is my sister.
Everybody going?
I'm gonna go.
It's weird for a guy with only brothers.
It's dangerous. It's dangerous.
What do you got, pizza? I think you win the prize. All right.
How are you?
Very well. Nice to see you.
Okay, I think we'll get started for the folks who are waiting online. As others grab their pizza. So please go ahead and get situated. Welcome to the Institute of Design, where we're home to a graduate school, action labs, things like food systems, equitable healthcare, and more, design training and development. At ID, we unite science and rigor with creativity and rapid iteration, and we're known for pioneering human-centered design, systems design, and other methods that apply design to the real world. Speaking of the real world, hi everyone. The world is here. We have folks streaming in, so please get situated, have your pizza, and let's get started. My name is Kristin Gecan. I'm the Assistant Dean here at the Institute of Design, and today we're talking about how design can help organizations change. Our speakers today have a lot of experience with this, so let's get right into it, introduce this topic, and our speakers, Roger and Tony. Roger, you have a related book out last year on this topic, and Tony, you're the director of our ID Executive Academy. So Roger, maybe you can start and tell us who you are and your case study.
Absolutely. You will be hearing a little bit on purpose today, informed by the work that I have done for years around a simple, original insight that says that the work that we do matters. Matters for everyone engaged, and over the years, for large organizations, I've helped develop some methods to do that. But I actually stumbled into the opportunity to do it at scale when I was asked, one project, if you will, as folks associated with ID will do on occasion, to help an organization that was undergoing fundamental change. This happened to be a place that makes sub sandwiches called Subway. They were shrinking in the U.S. They're the world's largest restaurant group by number of stores. They were shrinking in the U.S. and in a franchise environment, that's sort of a death as soon as you're shrinking. Generally, still a viable franchise they're selling as fast as they can. So I was called in with a team to go out and do the field research to figure out what that was. And by accident and peripherally, I discovered that they had this really lovely, really meaningful, inherent purpose to their business that they never celebrated and none of you were aware of. And so much of the work that I've done with organizations is to help them through almost the archaeological dig of uncovering the things that matter to their organization, the impact that they have in the world. A lot of people have talked about the fact that you can make your enterprise different and more meaningful, more engaging customers, more loyal among your employees by having a meaning that's more than creating profit, which is necessary but insufficient. But few people have figured out how to freaking do it. And it's not easy for, where you see it done well, it's typically the founders who are pursuing a passion and it's imbued in the organization. But it is the successors, it's the professional management who follow, who are so guilty so often with best intentions of putting up a bumper sticker and a purpose statement that every employee recognizes is the flavor of the month, and they need not pay attention to it because too shall pass. To get to an actual, authentic, meaningful purpose that can resonate over generations and live longer than any particular authority in the moment is hard to do and requires the tools of design. And so if I hadn't learned from some of the folks in this room over the years, I wouldn't have had the tools to do that and understand and uncover the very powerful messages that purpose.
Yeah, so Tony, can you tell us too a little bit about maybe an example of how you helped an organization change?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, let me kind of start from the top down.
Who are you?
Who am I? Yeah. I'm Tony Bynum. I graduated from here a long time ago. Let's just go with that. But I'm also a professor of practice, teaching here at the Institute of Design. I'm also the director of the new academy, executive academy. And the academy, for those who don't know, is really the third leg of the stool of the school. We have our action labs, we have the graduate school, which most people are familiar with. And then there's the academy. You could say it's create, disseminate, and apply. That's sort of how the three line up. The academy is about application, and specifically B2B application. So working with organizations to bring what we teach here, what we learn here, and the way we teach and learn it into an organization, and what we call work integrated learning, using that as a way to de-risk what might be considered training, or just simply taking upskilling courses. But really applying the principles of design and studio culture within the context of an organization. So that's one start. So let me ask you, you'll get to your next question. There's a very large financial wealth management organization here in the Midwest that by all rights is quite successful. You would actually say to yourself, why do you need to change? Things are going along just fine. But when a call for more client centricity was sent down from senior leadership, that question of what does client centricity mean comes up. And this isn't unique to this organization. It's many organizations, especially large ones. The innovation themes, the initiatives are empty with any kind of practical applications to what to do next. So what we did was, working with the Institute of Design, we actually created a Center of Excellence. And that Center of Excellence served a couple of purposes. It gave physical, tangible meaning to this theme. And it also did it in a way in which the leaders, as well as the folks within the organization, could now exchange in their understanding of what this initiative meant. I think the best way to really appreciate this is, so often we hear organizations talk about going from A to B. And you're sort of left to fill in the gap. And I call that the application gap. What we're doing with the academy, and what we did with this organization, is we help them fill in the space between the end of A to the beginning of B. Said differently, we helped them with a change narrative. We helped them make that initiative real and tangible through the learnings and applicable through the work that they were actually doing.
And so in this case, the change was becoming more customer-centric?
Yep.
And in the case of Subway, the change was, how would you characterize it?
It was becoming more customer-centric. They did, maybe for the first time, anyway, they had, I think there's a phenomenon that we all discover, if we weren't aware of it beforehand, that human beings tend to be self-centered and tend to push what they make and not particularly care what you need or what you do. And so it's almost an unnatural act to teach the empathy necessary for people to be thinking about designing to the need of another rather than the aspiration of themselves. Subway had a really good idea 100 years ago when they were competing against McDonald's. Everything is deep fried and generic, and we're going to make it fresh and customizable. And then that was it. And they ran with that model for a long time, and they had a really good, cheap solution, which was basically a salad bar in a hallway. You need an outlet, you're in business. Great business model for keeping it low cost, but not necessarily for adapting and evolving and being customer-centered, et cetera. So as the world changed around them, they didn't recognize that. I knew I was in trouble because when they called me in, I said, I'm going to start with you, Fred, the founder, brilliant guy, who became a billionaire after starting a business at the age of 17 because he couldn't afford to go to university, selling his mother's sandwiches. and then never went to university. But he hoped to go to med school, was selling these sandwiches, things were going sideways. I came in and said, I'm gonna go talk to your former loyal customers. I'm not gonna talk to the ones who like you, I'm gonna talk to those who loved you and left you, I'm gonna talk more from them. We got the woman named Kelly Costello, really good at talking to the most grief people. I then said, well, let me start with you. Tell me who your customer is. He said, I was like, oh God. So I said, I have franchises. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Just something really, maybe I'll listen to this person. I said, it made good sense when I thought about their franchise model, because it really was owner-operators who really remembered their communities. And that would be an authentic thing to say, except, I said, don't you collect revenues from all the franchisees to do centralized advertising? Who's your customer here? And like, that, it just wasn't even a concern. And what I discovered over time was he cared so much about the franchisees, but the customer was always something. That wasn't true for the franchisees. They viewed their customers the way that you described. But it meant that he was also capable of the next quote, which was, I'm not sure what's going on. I have not changed anything in 50 years. I thought, oh man, you keep a handful of my questions before I ask. So I think this notion of helping businesses to understand the really fast moving train that is the market you serve. So often, particularly when I'm talking, like kind of the older the mailer and the waiter you are, the more likely as an executive you are to say something salient about your customers that is at least 20 years old.
So how did you get them to understand they needed to change?
A very good question. This is pivotal. I found with almost every client situation, there is one insight, one moment that kind of cracks things open. We were interviewing customers and we're in the marketplace, and I cornered a child, a teen, who was, I didn't realize it was kind of like a minor, but there was a young man who's sitting in a Chipotle. And like a predator, I approached him because that's what Kelly's office is. And I, camera, and I said, can I ask you why you're here? What, Mom? He said, well, I'm like, actually, go away, old man. I'm here for my first date.
Oh, really?
Oh.
And I was like, oh,
It's awesome.
well, how about this? I will pay for your first date if you answer a couple questions for me while we're waiting. I promise I won't disappear. And he said, okay, thank you. And I said, why are you at Chipotle? And he told me more. And if you think about it, by the way, how many of you have been to a Subway? How many have been to a Chipotle? Chipotle is Subway with Mexican derived food. And, you know, it's literally salad bar in the hallway, somebody slaps the stuff together for you on a staged process. But Chipotle's experience is much preferred by most. And there are a number of reasons for that, but there's some things that he described where I've got a community table here and I like the lighting and it's savory and you know you can kind of smell the authenticity of the food. And I said, now would you consider meeting a date at Subway? And he looked me square in the face for the first time and said, Subway? Gross. It's like, cut! And I took that video to the executive team. People who devoted decades to the perfection of this venture. And were very proud of all they'd accomplished. And you know, they got to be the largest in the world, right? They had plenty to be proud of. And I played that clip for them, and you could see them swallow. You could see the future fading away in that one statement. And I did the same thing with the franchise board, people who were elected by their fellow franchisees to be kind of an oversight committee, and they were horrified. And yet not overly surprised, but it was just so confrontational that they had to face that reality that had been staring them in the face now for at least 15 years, but they had these are the same people who hired a pedophile to be their spokesperson, so they were capable of missing some obvious marks. But they really saw for the first time that they were losing it, and that they needed to fundamentally change, and that made all the difference.
Anything to add there, Tommy?
Yeah, I'd love to add a couple things. I love the point that you make, though, Roger, about making the urgency, making the burning platform something very real and tangible. And that's something that we do here at the Institute of Design. All of our students learn. In fact, when you talk to folks in industry about our students, they'll always say, oh, you guys are really good at making the intangible tangible. And I think it's really important to not overlook how important that is in enacting change. We can talk about change all day long. We can talk about what we want to be versus where we are today. But until I can bring you into the problem space, until I can bring you into what that future state might look like, that's when you really get it, the jaw-dropping moments, if you will. I say this to say, I think that's the next era, that's the next horizon for design. It's not so much about designing things, the output, but instead it's about designing the conditions that enable change. Whether that's in a community or whether that's in an organization, it's about bringing the problem to life in a really real and tangible way, allowing people to recognize it through the lens of their own roles, their own positions within the organization, and then putting in place a way of measuring the changed behavior as a result of this new understanding. And everything I've just said probably would have fallen, and still probably falls, into an organizational design or organizational behavior textbook. But I do think that as designers, our ability to pull ourselves away from the problem space, look at it with a level of objectivity, gives us a certain advantage. That advantage is we can we can look at the problem for what it really is. And we can call it for what it really is. Kristin and Roger were laughing at me because of my Newton joke. So it's not even a joke. Newton didn't invent gravity. He gave it a name. And that's what we do. We designate meaning to that which is hard and fuzzy and squishy. That's the only way you can actually get any level of momentum and get change to stick within an organization.
So I think it's fair to say that we're all facing a good amount of change these days, right? With policy changes coming left and right, before we can catch up with rapid technological advancement through AI and that sort of thing. So how can design help in these situations where we don't even know what's, sort of coming in an hour, right? As we exit this event, we might come to find out something new. So what does design do for those situations, and how can design help? Who wants to take that one?
That's you. Sure. You go.
Go ahead.
Well, first of all, welcome to the new normal, the chaos 2.0. And it is daunting. I have the benefit of having relocated during COVID to Nova Scotia, Canada. And so I'm staring back at the US from over a rising wall of tariffs to see what's happening in the increasing chaos that's looming among the largest impact nation on the planet. And what I would tell you is that it's a little bit like sailing in inclement weather, that you have to be ready to anticipate the changes that are going to come. So you have to be equipped for it. You have to have practiced it. You could easily capsize if you hadn't. But you don't have to fear it if you prepare for it. And so I come from a sailing tradition, so it's one of the things that I find comfort in is saying that this is. We do sail, yeah. Well, not this time of year, but that's what we do in Chicago as well. So yes, highly encouraged. But it does teach you some really basic fundamentals about survival in inclement situations or rapidly changing environments. And I think that we delude ourselves when we're in moments of relative calm or stability
that somehow that's how the world operates. It's very uncommon. We have had incredible privilege of relative economic and political stability now for generations on this continent. That is not the norm, and that has never been the norm in human history. So we have to get ready for the fact that it will not always be the norm. And I think we are, like cockroaches, one of the few species that can survive almost anything. So we just have to be prepared for the fact that we might need to expect almost anything.
Can you talk about how we could prepare for something like that?
Actually, this was something I was, as you were talking, Roger, it hit me that, and I'm going to break one of the rules and use a sports metaphor, and no, we're not supposed to do that. But, you know, when a quarterback steps up to the line and notices there's something different about the defense, he or she calls an audible. And the only reason an audible works is because the folks on the team know what to do when they hear the audible. So it's a real-time understanding of intent. And this backs into a lot of what we do as designers and how design can support organizations, in that through design, we're able to create portfolios of real options. And these options can be ranked and prioritized based on their effort, their impact, their return. There's a variety of different metrics. But what it also does, to the extent that it's well articulated and shared, is it creates a playbook. It creates the ability for an organization to be ready, organizational readiness. That's what Roger was pointing out. And this organizational readiness is best exemplified when leadership, as well as the rest of the organization, recognize and can articulate why we were going north and not west. Because we're going to head north, and along the way, things could change, for sure. But we're course correct along the way, but we know we're headed north. And it's just that amount of articulation and understanding of intention, of purpose, that gives an organization the ability to be agile and nimble in turbulent waters, so to speak. We call it an emergent strategy. You know, you can create a business plan, but can you predict the future? What happens when the plan is no longer a good plan? An emergent strategy allows you to really take into consideration the various variables that might exist and build that into how you operate on a day-to-day basis so that you're audible ready. Right?
So you have your purpose or your intent, right? Or your North Star. You've both been using metaphors about sort of wayfinding, sailing, or maybe quarterbacks, mountaineering. Let's throw that in the mix. Orienteering. If you have that North Star and you see all these changes happening, how do you sort of stay true to that North Star? Can you talk a little bit about how that North Star functions amidst the change?
I believe it's your turn.
Okay. You know, one of the things that we learned through the academy and working with organizations is that we can come in with knowledge, we can come in with the methods, the tools that an organization and groups and teams within an organization really need to adopt. But if you're not measuring what comes out of that, you have no idea whether or not it's actually effective or if it's being adopted or integrated into the operation. Metrics that matter. Kim Irwin teaches a class here at ID called Metrics That Matter. And I can't underscore how important it is for you to measure the very change that you're trying to get at in order to determine whether or not you are moving in the north direction or the westerly direction. When it comes to design, when it comes to bringing in design capability into an organization, there may be behavioral and activity changes that we're expecting teams to make as a result of the new learning. Measure the activity changes. How much cross-pollination of central insights are being shared across teams that wasn't being shared prior? How many teams and what's the number of use of storyboards as a way to express and explain the value created through a system or a platform? These little artifacts are ways of being able to put some sort of leading indication on whether or not we are actually behaving in a different way. The result is doing it repeatedly, consistently over time, but it has to be measured.
Thanks, Tom. May I? Two things. Design is often resonates through storytelling, by finding the narrative that resonates with the audiences and can carry them from points A to B, to cross your metaphorical bridge. And what I find is helpful in answering your question, staying true to purpose, is finding that narrative that people can track, own for themselves, and follow. And so defining that purpose in a way that resonates for others means it needs to be a dialogue, not a monologue. You don't dictate it, you discover it together. And then you, in order to make that story credible, you have to recognize something that is a bit unnatural for me at least, and I think for many humans, which is that you don't sort of plan the future, you plan for the potential futures. And some of us worked at a place where scenario planning was a tool in order to do that. I was informed, those of you who were adults in 2008, there was a financial meltdown in this country that came out of the mortgage crisis of CDOs. And we went through an exercise with banking clients, financial clients, to say, what does the future hold? Because they had to make really fundamental investment and protection decisions based on what future might emerge. And we did this, I like this one because it's such a very simple example. We did a 2x2 grid that said this is going to stay local or go global. This is going to stay tied to mortgages and real estate investment properties, or it's going to broadly infect the financial sector. And here's what in each of those four quadrants would be your leading indicators of the future that's actually emerging. And if you could anticipate what those outcomes might be, you could now start tracking the things that start showing up in the news and through other sources that you'd use to be able to track the evidence in the marketplace. So that you could begin to pivot your strategy to the future that's actually arriving, one that's out of your control, but you need to try and anticipate. A little bit like having a weather forecast, a little bit like being able to anticipate future plays. So understanding the probable futures, the probable impacts, and what the indicators would be of its arrival is a really useful tool for allowing you to say, I've got this narrative, but to play it out, I have to prepare for different chapters of this saga and to know where I am. Because it's really embarrassing to be telling story A when future B is showing up.
So you can try to understand what the future might look like, and you combine that with your understanding of why you exist, your purpose, your intent, and then what happens?
I got it first. I would suggest to you that there's it took me a while to machine an answer to this. Thank you for just teeing it right up. And if you buy my book, it's in there. So I was helping Subway and now other clients with defining their purpose, and then how would they live that every day? And more importantly, how would you know when you were failing to do so? The way I discovered this, by the way, was by accident. They didn't say we have a purpose. They weren't aware of it. What happened was I was presenting the findings from this research where, the video, the kid shows up, to a large group in Las Vegas, and Fred, the founder, who was a genius, by the way, and died prematurely, not because of my presentation, but soon after, said that he was really concerned about me doing this presentation because I was going to be basically anticipating that franchisees were going to have to spend money, and he'd worked very hard to keep them from ever having to do that. And not I, but the prognosis got a standing ovation because finally they sensed that somebody was hearing the problem and prescribing a solution. So that was super helpful. But then I was called back 3 years later. Fred had passed away prematurely. They had not implemented what we had discussed. And the interim CEO texted me. Fortunately, his phone number was in my phone. And he said, hey, Roger, could you come back and do what you told us to do 3 years ago? I was like, oh, It's so much harder than telling you to do it. But I thought this could be a remarkable exercise, and so I took that on. And what was supposed to be, a few months of advising them turned into a career practically. But in the course of doing that, what I concluded was, to make it memorable, I could come up with a simple framework made up of the letter P for defining your purpose, but then translating that into a promise, the promise of brand, the promise of your offering, the promise that you make to your employees, et cetera. And it should be a single, very resonant promise. When you think about brand promises, they tend to be things like Disney promises magic and Nike promises winning, et cetera. It's this notion that you have that often can be distilled to a single word or phrase that is what you exist to deliver. It's not your purpose, it's the offering that you're promising to the world. And they need to resonate with one another. Then you start establishing some basic principles that you can agree among groups about how you're going to operate. Not just your employees, by the way. This was another thing that took me a while to figure out, that there are so many stakeholders necessary in any marketplace in order to bring this to fruition. You've got customers, but you've got employees, you've got shareholders and owners, and you've got management teams, and you've got partners, and you've got channel participants, et cetera. Lots of people who have different stakes in this, but they can all be brought into alignment with the appropriate narrative, the appropriate metrics, in this case, principles. Then you translate it to the different next people who represent those constituencies, and lastly, the metrics, kind of like from scenario planning, of performance. And you would have different performance metrics for different constituencies that map to the principles that deliver on the promise in order to achieve purpose. And you can track those metrics and follow it through that hierarchy to say where are we succeeding, where are we failing. And you can report on it just like you would anything else. Sustainability and other, relatively novel intangibles. DEI was another one, I hope remains another one, that it requires us to think about new metrics that would allow you to trace your performance through the course of the organization.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. When I think about metrics, when I think about making sure that change sticks, or at least giving it the best probability of sticking, you have to ask for a place on the dashboard. So one of the ways in which we have done this before is we've looked at the behavioral changes I mentioned earlier and what sort of artifacts and activities they should result from them, and then back it into an organization's OKRs or KPIs. Because again, if it's not measured, it doesn't matter. And if we're truly committed to the change, giving it a place on the dashboard is one way to make sure that it sticks. It gets built into the governance of the organization, there's accountability for it, but more importantly, there's a number or some sort of visualization of whether or not it's working or not working. But without this, it just becomes sort of an idea, just another thing that was done in time.
So can you talk a little bit about, you were talking about the different you have your purpose, and then you have your offering or offerings, and how those interact, and then we'll talk about that for a minute, and then maybe open up for questions?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. There's a great quote, Tony Hsieh, ex-CEO of Zappos, he passed away. He used to say, your brand is a trailing indicator of your culture. And I love that, because in many ways, we all know what it's like to work at a place or work in an organization, and you get treated worse than the kind of service that you're expected to deliver on the front stage to your customers or your clients. And at some point, that catches up with you. And so it's critically important, even as a intangible metric, that the culture that we create reflect the kind of service, the kind of values that we're trying to push out in the front stage through our product, service, or offering. And so when I think about all that we've been talking about, it's more than just a bunch of activities and posters on the wall, but it's about actually living it out day to day. Folks talking to folks who have not spoken with each other before. Sharing this sort of collective understanding of what the problem is. There's something that we do here at ID quite often. I talk about in my classes. We all know the parable of the five or six blind men and the elephant. What we do is we reconstruct the elephant. You don't know that parable? It's in the book, isn't it? No, I'm just kidding.
Buy the book.
I'm going to butcher this, okay? It wasn't. So there's a king. I'm going to really make this very simple. There's a king who's asked these five blind men to describe an elephant. And each of the blind men take a chance, and based on what they're feeling and touching, they will say, "This is what an elephant is." Well, an elephant is this thin thing with light hair, or an elephant is this long, stretchy thing that is flexible, right? The idea is that they're all right. Every one of them is right. They're just touching a different part of the elephant. And I think that's the opportunity for designers, is to help reconstruct the elephant for organizations, because then the we-them goes away or gets significantly reduced. Why do they do it that way and we have to do it this way? Well, as designers, we can create context and settings where you can actually understand what the other folks within the organization are doing and why they're doing it. And that's what starts to lead to this at least thin layer of trust that we can start to build on top of. And it's through that trust and through that broader understanding of the elephant that we're all touching that we can actually initiate change and have it move forward in a meaningful way. Any of you who know that parable, please forgive me. I butchered it, but look it up. You can find it on Google, I'm sure.
Well, it sounds like our last question. So I would like to share with you another alphabetic tool that I think is helpful in navigating this. I call it AVBP. It stands for Angst, Vision, Belief, Plan. And what I have found time and time again when you're trying to construct the narrative to navigate change, it's really helpful to get everyone to agree on the source of angst. Because what happens, particularly in large organizations where people are kind of one or two steps removed from either the marketplace or the changing environment or changing regulations, whatever's causing this need for change, they don't share the same level of angst about the future is changing. And so you need to be very articulate about saying, there is a problem. The room is on fire, we must leave the room. And people are like, just toast, somebody's burning pizza. So being very clear about the source of angst is very important. Then tag onto that sort of anxiety creation with a vision that says, but there is a better possible future as a result of this, and give them a reason to believe that that's possible, either evidence from others, precedent from the past, first steps that you've already taken that start to show the path, anything that gives enough confidence to sort of say, okay, I believe we're on fire, I believe we could survive this, and I see that that's possible. And then the last part is a plan that says, and let's collaborate on saying what we're each going to do in order to achieve that. And by the time you've finished that conversation, people are off and running on this new exercise. And what I realized is that for that to work, that math, A plus V plus B plus P, has to be greater than their perceived cost of the status quo, of staying as they are. They have to understand that that is preferable to ignoring it, which is what so often will happen for people who are disaffected or just one step removed from the pain point that you're trying to motivate. So AVBP, greater than C, useful to remember.
Great.
Thanks, Kristen.
Anything else to add, Tony, on that one? No?
No, I love AVBP.
Okay, do we have questions from everyone here at ID?
So when you're talking about performance. Sure. Okay. So when you're talking about performance and measuring that, how do you include the quantitative and the qualitative? Because the challenge often is that those dashboards don't accommodate the qualitative understanding of the, if you say the purpose at the end of the day, right?
Thank you, Nick.
Get your exercise in.
I think it's a great question. You're right, because if we're looking at behavior and activity, unless someone is standing there with some sort of tool, clock or punch to actually measure every time it happens. In the world of Agile and coming out of the Six Sigma world of performance, there's something called Gemba. If you've heard of it, but it's a Gemba walk. And Gemba actually means go to where the work is done. And when organizations conduct Gemba walks, what they're doing is they're actually what I call working out loud. They're allowing the work to show, to demonstrate what people are doing through their activities as it relates to a challenge or something that they're working on. That's a very long way of saying making the work visible and tangible is one of the ways in which you can start to actually see the differences in how people are actually performing within the organization. Marrying that with quantitative results. That gives us a way to understand what's happening and what the result of those actions are actually taking place. It's another, I think, tenet of a studio culture where getting the work up on the walls, giving it a place to live is one of the ways in which you're not only demonstrating the problem that you're trying to solve, but you're demonstrating how you're trying to solve the problem. And to the extent that you're able to tell a story of where insights and learnings are coming from based on the work that you're sharing in this very tangible way, that's how you start to change behavior. Yep.
Thank you. May I? I would tell you that it's helpful to me to recognize that human beings are very poorly evolved animals. What I mean by that is, and I trust that you will have observed this in your own observation of the human condition, we are bad at being aggregated into large groups. We're bad at working in collaborative teams. We're bad at even trusting each other. And if you think about the long course of human history, you will imagine that not very long ago, we survived based on trusting the tribe of humans that we knew, because whoever was coming over the hill was coming to pillage and was dangerous. And so we had a lot of distrust of the other and a lot of fear of the unknown. And fortunately, we only lived to be about 20, so the problem wasn't long-lived. We have evolved so much as a result of the Industrial and the Knowledge Revolution and the Agricultural Revolution to be able to aggregate into huge concentrations of human beings who have to interoperate in very complex machinations together in order to deliver on the complex society that we're part of. And we're not really well evolved yet to do it. So I tell you that only because it's helpful to me to remember that we are predisposed to doing self-defeating things because of the situation that we find human society in today. And that we have to overcome that. One of the things that I cherish about design is I see it as a bridge between the humanity, the primal humans of the past and the evolved humans of the future or the present. That design can be the way that we think about being more collaborative and more understanding and empathetic and all the things that you have to literally design an institute to teach people these things because it's an unnatural friggin' act. It is for me. The way that, therefore, we tend to measure things is quantitative because it's frickin' easy, because it's obvious. Oh, look, there's 17 chopsticks on the ground there. Well, that's 17 is the answer. That's how bad the problem is. It's very hard to then deconstruct that and say, who dropped the chopsticks? Why'd they drop them? Did they throw them there, or are they trying to trip me? And all the qualitative things that make that a much more richer and thoroughly understood challenge. But if you don't look for it, you're not going to find it. And the methods of ethnographic research and the tools of empathy are those at your disposal that you're trained here, that business schools don't teach, that most humans, most executives are not immersed in, that in my experience, the more engineering-oriented you are, the less empathy-oriented you are, the more you're obsessing about the thing rather than the user. There's a lot of challenges that we have to overcome with people. I will suggest to you one tool, that I've discovered only recently called groupsolver.com. GroupSolver is an AI-driven tool that allows you to do qualitative research in kind of a quant way. So imagine a chat survey tool, like you're answering an SMS on your phone that's asking you some questions, but what it's doing is integrating your answer with answers of other humans and starting to say, well, that's interesting that you say blue is your favorite color. 37% of people think, blue is their favorite color. Which shade of blue is better from your perspective? And you can basically get a focus group out of an interview, out of a survey, in really fast order and very inexpensively. It requires you to design cleverly, but it's, I think, a real accelerant to making it easier for people who'd be predisposed to go quant to find qualitative data in the methods that they use.
Can I say something really quick about that?
Of course.
The qual-quant discussion, quite often, this is where you start to see groups within organizations, especially traditional organizations, kind of butt heads. There's a quantitative camp and there's a qualitative camp. And what often doesn't get talked about is what you're actually trying to do. Are you trying to generate something or evaluate and measure something? So really, if you look at qual versus quant in the context of are you trying to create or are you trying to measure, the answers start to become a little bit more clear. As we're looking for patterns and relationships, so those non-obvious insights, those things that can't be necessarily measured but have to be gleaned through insight, qualitative methods are wonderful for that. When you have something, then we can measure it. Then we can use a quantitative approach. And there's many tools that, as Roger was pointing out, that will cross those borders. But I do think asking that other question changes the answer, not only the answer, but it also gives a little bit of clarity to what the objective is as well.
Thank you.
More questions?
Hi, I'm Anurag. I'm a dual degree student here at IIT, MDes and Public Policy and Administration. So my question largely is around navigating, especially disruptive times, disruptive moments, like we are in one, right? Like how should organizations think about it? Is it something you would get on immediately and start doing, or is it something you have to tread cautiously? Because not all disruptions are clear. Not all disruptions are clear with what they would achieve and how they would achieve it, right? We had like a whole blockchain equivalent 10 years ago. Suddenly it's a new AI disruption, right? One took a different turn, the other, we don't know where it'll go. But how does an organization even navigate? How do they know, right?
I can take it. I think what you're getting at is the other side of our organizational mind. Innovation, there's never a good time to innovate. There's never a good time to, it will always get in the way of keeping the lights on. But if we can parse our time through some sort of portfolio of resources and allocation, we can then create time. There's a wonderful HBR article written by Jeff Tull, who's in our community here, called Managing Your Innovation Portfolio. He had a co-author whose name escapes me right now. But if we look at 70% of our time being spent on the things that are actually driving the business, creating value, keeping the lights on, 20% being growth, looking at adjacencies and stretch areas, and 10%, to get to your point, is really looking at trying to understand and put meaning to some of these emerging technologies and trends, things that are happening in the world. It doesn't get in the way of keeping the operation running, but it gives you an allocated amount of time to look into those areas. If you think about 10%, that's a half a day a week. 20% is really a day a week. So if there was actually a way to create an understanding and a curiosity around spending 10% of your time looking at these things that are on the fringe and just trying to make meaning of them and understand how they could roll back into the organization in some useful way. At least that way, you're putting some guardrails up around how much time, how much resource actually gets spent. You're quantifying curiosity, put it that way.
Oh, you're just trying to get a quote now. Well done.
I try.
Okay, can we just rename this Quantifying Curiosity? By Tony Bynum. I teach a course that was thrust upon me on complexity theory, and I've tried to allow my MBA students to understand how to apply complexity in the course of kind of business decisions that they will face in their career. Complexity isn't very complex. It is, if you imagine a simple spectrum from simple to complicated to complex to chaotic, it's an increasing number of variables and the predictability that goes off exponentially as you have more variables interacting and influencing each other. The lesson for most of us is to look at any situation and see if we can characterize where we are on the spectrum. Is this new AI or blockchain or administration or whatever is the change agent a characteristic of chaos? Is it just complicated or complex, complicated, or simple? What we're used to and what we default to is waking up every day and thinking the sun's going to rise and we have to put on our shoes, and the fasteners for our shoes are still laces, so we know how to do it all. And we operate by default on simplicity. And so the more complex things get and the more unfamiliar, the more we tend to respond as though it were chaos, which tends to be, like, the right response is fight or flight. It's quite primordial, right? But when you're in chaos, you have to protect yourself from the unpredictable. So get out of there, or get into the mayhem. There are also things you can do in order to reduce chaos down to complexity, where it's more manageable, or reduce complexity down to just by eliminating a few variables to make it just complicated, which isn't very threatening. You just have to navigate a little differently. So I think, again, a useful framework is to say, where am I on the scale from simple to chaotic? And what are the different ways I would respond in order to reduce risk and make the future a little easier to anticipate? And I can't give you all the methods for doing that, but it's actually kind of intuitive when you think about it and apply it to different situations. Like, if all of a sudden you find yourself in a stampeding crowd, what are the things to do amid that chaos? Because there's a lot of variables that are about to run you over. So you have to eliminate yourself as one of those variables. Different when it's complicated or complex. Characterize the environment around you and respond accordingly, rather than treating it as chaos that one must fear or flee. Until you understand the context, you're better to kind of examine than to take action.
Microphone? Cool. This might be a little bit of a long-winded question. All right, cool. Cool. So in the past few years, I've seen a lot of organizations, I call it empathy washing, kind of like greenwashing, but they say the right things, but they're not actually practicing it. And then in recent times, and we don't need to get too political, we've seen a pushback against certain initiatives, DEI, other things as well. And I think there's changes that are rapidly happening within organizations. And I wonder sometimes, are these reflective of internal culture changes happening within organizations, or is it reflective of external pressures and conforming to things such as policy and federal level things happening, right? I'm curious, where does the role of design and designers, where do we play into that? If we are going into organizations, we are talking about, I think you mentioned, your brand is a trailing indicator of your culture, right? Where do we factor into all of this?
I am a prostitute, in that if a client asks me to solve a problem, I will do my best to do it. And sometimes I confess that I fake it until I can make it, because I want to be involved in solving that. I have frequently been asked to help deal with a culture problem. And I say, sure, I will help you do that. When I was quite a bit younger, I was throwing myself at that problem and thinking that you solve culture directly. But what I want you to consider is that culture is an after effect. Because apparently I insist upon throwing models and tools at you, I would like to introduce you to the propeller model, which says that purpose is the hub of your propeller, and you got 3 blades. And you design them in this order in order to achieve the culture outcome you're trying to achieve. Think of culture as the outcome, the evidence of human interaction. And the hub of this is the purpose. Let's agree where we're going and why. You might inform that with strategy and a number of other things that enable that purpose. And then the big blades are structure. So what is the process? What are the critical activities necessary in order to be able to deliver on this? Then structure. So what would be kind of the domains of competence or expertise necessary to deliver on that process? And then people come last, ironically, and you say, okay, well, what kind of talent do I need within this structure to deliver on that process to fulfill that purpose? What I find, and by the way, that propeller then, if you've designed it well, spins organically and cleanly and delivers a clean vortex behind it and propels the organization forward, and that vortex is the culture. And if it feels smooth and that you're flying forward as intended, you've got the culture that you've designed and deserve. If it is turbulent and chaotic, it's because one of your propeller blades is bent and you're going wobbly, wobbly, wobbly through space, and it's a very rough friggin' ride. But for you to look at the turbulent wind and say, I gotta fix me that wind, I gotta fix that culture, is misinterpreting the engineering of your organization that produces that culture. So I don't know that brand is a function of your culture. I think your brand is a declaration that you set, and then the reputation you earn is the authentic brand that you hold in the marketplace that arrives about the same time as your culture. They're both after effects of the things you strategically do to achieve the desired outcomes you're looking for. But if you don't like your culture, you have to fix your organization, not your culture. Yeah. Yeah, which might be turbulent as well, right? Because often you're doing this because you're navigating a changing environment.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about propellers or fans. But yeah, I'm going to talk about football. We're at a school of human-centered design, and one of the words that is universal in our lexicon is this idea of empathy. And it's reached a point where it's really become it's a buzzword in many ways. Who really defines what empathy is and in what context? The challenge I think we have as designers, to your point, Robbie, is it's not empathy as much anymore, it's humility. How do we as designers integrate humility as a tool within our toolbox to attack, or shouldn't say attack, to address problems? And to look into the complex and ambiguous spaces that we're trying to shed light into. It kind of goes back to something Roger said earlier. You didn't use these exact words, but when an organization keeps doing what it's always done, the train going down the track, they overshoot. And that's actually what causes a disruption in the market, is the overshooting. You've actually surpassed the needs of the folks you're serving. And that train going down the tracks at 100 miles an hour, in many ways, you're incentivized to keep it going and not stop it. That is almost an act of, this is the right way and the only way. And I've seen organizations and teams continue down a path assuming that the problem they're solving is the problem that has always been there. But without a level of humility, you're not able to really see the true attributes of what the problem might be, or what the characteristics of change might be. And so I think it's something that we need to bring into our toolbox, especially when I think about topics like equity. It's hard for someone who has never been an other to design for someone who has been othered. So there's a whole branch of inward-looking observations that one needs to make and should make in order to bring it to life through design. And to be really clear, this isn't about changing who you are. It's not being something other than yourself. It's about recognizing that your very presence changes the outcome of the problem that you're working on. And just knowing that alone and just knowing how you might impact that change gives you at least some way of dialing back some of the noise and the variability that might come from your presence. Make sense?
Thank you, Schrodinger's cat.
Okay, one last question.
Was there another question?
Yeah, there's another one. Go ahead. It's okay.
Thank you for this great conversation. My name's Ernesto. I wanted to build on Roger coming back to the subway story. I find it fascinating about the power of the singular narrative about this child who essentially says, there's disgust with Subway. And I think about that, it's interesting because it's so powerful, but yet it's juxtaposed to what we think about, which is gathering data. Like, how do we understand that that isn't just an outlier, and also interviewing someone outside of the subway, right? So thinking about how we collect information and then reconcile that with the way we are proposing change within organizations. And so I'm just curious in terms of your thought process, or whether there was also information that you coupled along with that single narrative to get folks to get on board. Because I just think it's interesting how other executives might look at that and say, well, that's just a single customer. Like, why should we listen to them? But yet it's so profound that it does have that empathetic change and drive to want to change.
The question presumes something, that outlier is bad. I think that's a function of a long history of quantitative data where we look for statistical rigor and applicability. I think the outliers can teach you more in a changing world. And you should be seeking outliers and sort of drawing patterns among those findings in a funny way. It may well have been an outlier. It was an outlier in the data we were gathering, because what we were getting was much more close-in kind of critique, like I don't like this kind of lettuce, I like that kind of lettuce, et cetera. The toaster smells bad. It was very incremental stuff. The outliers allow you to be provocative in order to promote the change that's needed. So to some degree, what I was doing was being exploitative and using an outlier in order to achieve the outcome that the much more nuanced information was sending us in that direction. But I knew if I just went with sort of quant data, it wasn't clear enough to them how they needed to change. Because the quant data just said, the current is bad. It also said, some competitors seem to be doing well, but very difficult to draw the line between, should we therefore be like this competitor, which isn't necessarily the case. What you could do, though, is take somebody who looked like your target market in the past, who was revolted by your offering, and say, that's concerning. Let's see how that maps to the other data, to kind of prove to yourselves that it's not an outlier, but it doesn't have to be in the middle of the bell curve, right? Because it might be a leading indicator, which means the bell curve hadn't shown up yet. So my job is to help them, your job is to help them understand that qualitative information and leading indicators like that can be the more important, and try and get away from what you were describing as the evaluative data that marketing information often gives you, that kind of anchors you to the present too often. Is that fair? Does that match your, okay, question? Thank you. Anything, my friend?
No, I think.
So I think we're going to wrap up. Tony, do you want to have any last word on design, the value of design in this moment?
Everybody who's ever had a class with me Everybody who's ever had a class with me knows that I use this quote: "Design is the design of the design that helps you design." And if you slow that down, you'll know exactly what I'm saying. That quite often we have to create the things that help us create the thing that we're trying to create. And it's this building, this iterative building process that allows us to have the kind of conversations and communication with those around us, stakeholders, to bring them into the process. And so my call to designers is we have to do a better job, and I would love to see us really own the way in which we bring stakeholders into the design process. Because the design process isn't just for certain people. Design process is a philosophy. It's a way of changing. It's a way of seeing the future that regardless of your role or position, you can apply. And so bringing folks into the process, I think, is one of those ways which we cut down on some of the barriers of communication. We ease the path forward for transformation. And more importantly, we invite a level of diversity into the solutions that we're ultimately trying to come up with. Is it good? Thank you. Thanks, bro.
If you haven't already, please get pizza. We have lots of pizza.
We did, but Kelly's here now, so.